Michelangelo and Pope John Paul, storyteller and saint. Okay, what can they do for us? This is the proposition that I am making. I know as a geology person that off the coast of Oregon and Washington and BC, a little bit, is the Juan de Fuca plate that subducts always underneath the American plate. But almost as a rule, every 250 years it has a major bump earthquake. Well, that was 300 years ago. We are 50 years past due. Now this can have fantastic effects upon everything in the Pacific Northwest. Not only that, a 600 or 700 foot tsunami could reach Japan and finish off Fukushima. Now, is that something to worry about? It is. But the question now is can anything be done? Could you actually use metaphysics into prayer and petition God, that most Christians believe in, to tell us when? When is this going to happen? Because it is going to happen. There is no doubt about that. Geologists don't lie. They may not know everything to the minute, but they know science. So it's going to happen this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years? Okay. So is it possible to ask a saint who has passed to intercede in this question, to say, it's going to happen such and such a day. Get out of town for a while. Is that possible? Okay, so what are we looking at here in the big picture? Okay, let's take Popo, the volcano outside of Mexico City, on the flank south where I went to University de las Americas in Cholula, Puebla. Right on the flanks. That mountain here, November 2017, just had a earthquake volcanic eruption. What does that mean? Well, if it does what it did years ago, covering the Aztec city of Mexico City with mountains of mudslides and debris and ash, then that's going to really affect Mexico. Okay, as a geology person, geology person, thinking on this, okay, is this connected? Well, yes, it is connected. Earthquake volcanoes are connected, especially with the West Coast. So is this a precursor of what can happen to Juan de Fuca? No, they're not speaking Spanish. It's just geology. So yes, it could. So here's the idea. Bringing in religion to this matter. It's not that God is punishing man, but it's that these things are natural events that happen. But is there a relationship between man and survival in the context of God and prophecy? I think there is, but it has to be scientific. Okay, so we know these two things are going to happen. That mountain's going to go, and so is Juan de Fuca, the plate, with probably a tsunami. There's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is petition our saints through prayer and ask for a day, a date, a time to be prepared. I think it's possible. I think that information is apprehendable. Okay, if you're a Mason, an old school Mason, you know that our founding fathers like Jefferson and Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, Philosophical Society, and George Washington, they did not deal with religion. They dealt with sacred geometry and ancient wisdom from the mystery schools and applied it throughout our land to build a new nation, one nation under God, indivisible. And you could almost say in Jesus' name, but it wasn't spoken because that was in the secret mode. Okay, let's apply that to today. I can recall other people who I don't think were Masons. Edgar Casey in his wonderful group ARE, Association for Research and Enlightenment, which was essentially our high school key club. And then even Carlos Castaneda, an anthropologist who went to Mexico to find his ancient brethren, Nagua Don Juan, who taught him the mystery schools of Mexico, about the Aztec, the Toltec, the Miztec, the Olmec. And so these people, I think, are relevant as a way of thinking, because Carlos Castaneda, you might say, was our teacher in Mexico in 1970 as he was writing his books, Journey to Islam, The Power of Dreaming, A Separate Reality, as he spoke of the death defiers, the ancient ones, something that the Indians throughout our region that we traveled on horseback with understood intuitively and experienced in their experiential desert world. But if you bring all that to bear, certainly there must be some way to find out when these events that are inevitable are going to happen, like the volcano and like the Juan de Fuca fault, 6, 8, 900-foot tsunami. Okay, there must be a way that we can discern this knowledge. I think it's through prayer and petitioning our saints, because if everything that we believe in religion is true, that is, there is a connectivity between man, the angels, the saints, and God in heaven, then they must know about this earth that they created for their children. So, and I think they would tell us if we could just ask, seek, and find this answer. So let's continue on with the story that I'll be telling and I guess repeating about how I met Pope John Paul in '86 and how I was in Medjugorje in '81 during the assassination attempt, and that was a psychic phenomena about like Fatima in Christchurch, New Zealand. So the question is, these two experiences, do they qualify me to ask this question? And I mean, with Pope John Paul as my personal saint, I believe, since I spent a very unusual afternoon with him, and also there in Medjugorje, the Russians, or the KGB, I guess you could say, the Soviet Union had still occupied Yugoslavia, and they were running these terrible cartoons about Pope John Paul to justify what they had done as far as hiring this Slavic person to assassinate him. And so I interfered in that and complained, and actually they told me, get out of the country, go back to Europe. And so I did. But when I sat with him there in Christchurch in 1986, it was as though he recognized that I had stood ground for him. I had defended what I thought was right. And so that was kind of a strange feeling during this Fatima event there in Christchurch in '86. And so that's kind of the basis of where I'm trying to pursue this, and also as a Scottish Rite Mason in the metaphysical realm, because I believe these things are known, especially of that magnitude and the effect it's going to have upon the Pacific and so many people. So let's continue. We'll just go through the whole history of John Paul, Medjugorje, Fatima, and how I, played some just peripheral part in this, and see if along the way we can find a revelation that will give us the answer. John Paul, who lived at the Vatican and had the Sistine Chapel as his church, and the history of most all of Christianity was esoterically revealed there in that chapel, the Sistine Chapel. And so Pope John Paul instructed me, esoterically you might say, to make these things known. You might ask, well, why would he do that? Well, I really don't know that answer, but I do know that I did spend part of a remarkable afternoon with him in Christchurch, New Zealand. After I had graduated in geology from Central, '86, gone to Australia, enrolled in the graduate program, University of Sydney, but decided to learn for myself, and so bought an old truck, drove all over Australia, crossed to Perth, watched the Kookaburras give the America's Cup back, and then drove back across and decided to go on to South America. So I had to wait a week in New Zealand for my flight to leave out of Auckland to Buenos Aires there in Argentina. And so as I was waiting, I happened to take a bus down to Christchurch, and one Saturday, I believe it was the 23rd of November, '86, I was walking out of this remarkable museum where they had in the basement, opened the basement up, and they had 3 terracotta soldiers brought in from China for this exhibit, and the lecture was really mesmerizing. So I walked out in a daze, and here was a woman standing out front across the street, and I could tell, being a world traveler, I could tell she was American, so I walked over to her and I said, "You're an American, aren't you?" And she says, "Are you here to see the Pope?" And I said, I don't know, is he in town? And she says, "Yeah, he's going to be kind of giving a little service out of town here, just a walk away. You want to go?" I said, "Sure." And so we walked, and she was the personal secretary to a senator from Alexandria, Virginia. And we walked about half an hour to a little church down a little grassy knoll, and saw there in the backyard of the church, no one was there because we were early, a little podium set up, plywood, foot off the ground, 8 by 8 something. And so we sat down in front of it. Beautiful November in Australia, of course, or New Zealand is down under is uh, summertime. And so a beautiful sunny day, blue skies, sheep as far as you can see into the hills. And so we just sat down right in front of this box there in the grass and kind of laid back, and looked at the sky and exchanging stories. And then people started walking in from wherever, the little trail, and 20, 30 people, I guess. And then finally this Mercedes drives up, and Pope John Paul and the Bishop of Wellington, not Christchurch, Wellington, uh, they were getting out of town because he had been giving these spectacular speeches in Wellington and Auckland, before thousands of people. But here they just wanted to get out of town and take a cruise in the country. And so they walked up on the little stage and began talking. And it was really remarkable. I wasn't a Catholic, so I really didn't think much of it. I mean, here you are sitting, 2 feet from the Pope. We had to scoot back a couple of feet so we could look at him, full view, not just, be right, there. And so he gave this amazing talk about just, I don't know, stuff that preachers talk about, and brilliant people like the wise man from Krakow, Poland. Uh, and then something really strange happened. Now, she was a radical Protestant. I was basically, I've been to all the Protestant churches, but I was basically brought up in the Greek Orthodox in Dallas, Texas. And so I was thinking all this time, like, wow, here's a Protestant. Here I am, kind of an Orthodox, and there he is, Catholic. This is very interesting. Well, something even more interesting happened. A supernatural phenomena that was certainly, in some respects, rival Fatima happened. And she and I, being non-Catholics, being the most alert in the group, saw it first. And what it was a row of black ships, clouds that looked just like black ships that were coming directly for us across the clear blue sky from off the coast. There's a volcanic cone, I forgot the name of it, there, not a caldera, a cone, and came from around the side of that little volcano right towards us. And it was so bizarre. It's like, good grief, what is this? And so we just froze and looked, and after a minute or so, John Paul, since we're sitting right in front of him, eye to eye, 2 feet from him, face to face, he looked at us, and then he looked at what we were looking at, and then he stopped talking. And everybody, we just sat there and waited for these black ships to arrive. Well, when they got there, the first one unloaded more water than buckets. I mean, it was a flash flood falling from the sky. And of course, all the people in the grass, ran away and disappeared in the woods. And of course, we didn't move. We sat there in the rain till the water was up 3 or 4 inches in the grass. It was amazing. And the Bishop Wellington had got this huge black umbrella out of their Mercedes and ran back there and held it over the Pope. And the two of them sat there immovable for this whole event as we sat in front of them in this summer gusher rain, immovable, just eye to eye, wondering, wow, she was talking, we were talking, they didn't talk, they just sat and looked. And we were like eye to eye for a half an hour during the event. And I'm thinking, God, what is all this about? It was so bizarre. So finally, I remember I turned to her and I said, it might look bad if we outlast the Pope, so maybe we should go. And so she says, okay. And so we got up, and I could have reached out and shook hands. I could have kissed his hand or grabbed the hem of his whatever or something. But we just looked at one another for a minute, and then, kind of just a smile, and then we just walked off.
Recorded 81, Christchurch 86, now today. So,
remember, John Paul worked on the chain gang under the Nazis, and later fought the Nazis as he fought the communists, helping removing them from Poland to make Poland a free and independent and a good Christian nation. This also helped him help Ronald Reagan free Eastern Europe from the Soviet Union and bring those walls down. And also, in a way, he helped bring Christianity back to Russia for Putin's generation, after the KGB owned the Orthodox Church for 30 years. Yes, these things are worth remembering.